Welcome to another episode of the Federal Newswire Lunch Hour Podcast with your host, Andrew Langer.
Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Lunch Hour with Federal Newswire. I'm your host, Andrew Langer, and if you are watching us on YouTube right now, you know you can always catch us on just about every fine podcast platform. Please subscribe, leave a review, leave comments, and let your friends and family members all know what we're doing here at the Lunch Hour. If you're listening to us, you know you can watch us and see our guests and see me if you want to on YouTube, so go and check that out as well. I'm very excited to bring our guest on today. His name is Clifford May. He is the founder and president of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, a nonpartisan policy institute focusing on national security that was created immediately following the 9/11 attacks in the United States, on the United States in 2001. Under his leadership, FDD has become one of the most highly regarded think tanks in the United States and a sought-after voice on a wide range of national security issues. He has helped assemble a staff and advisory board of the most compelling scholars and experts whose research, ideas, and recommendations have shaped important policies and legislation on terrorism, non-proliferation, human rights, Islamism, democratization, and related issues. He's had a long and distinguished career in international relations, journalism, communications, and politics, a veteran news reporter, foreign correspondent, and editor at the New York Times and other publications. He has covered stories around the world, including datelines from Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Northern Ireland, Hungary, Kazakhstan, China, and Russia, and a whole bunch of countries in between. From 2016 to 2018, Cliff served as a commissioner on the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom, an independent bipartisan U.S. federal government commission that makes policy recommendations to the president, the secretary of state, and Congress in order to advance the pivotal right of religious freedom around the world and integrate religious freedom into America's foreign policy. A former syndicated columnist for Scripps, he is now the weekly foreign desk columnist of the Washington Times, frequent guest on national and international television and radio news programs, and provides analysis and participating in debates on national security issues. His writings have appeared in newspapers all around the world. He's the co-editor of a book on the conflict in Afghanistan and Pakistan, as well as one on energy policy. He has his master's degrees from both Columbia University School of International Affairs and School of Journalism, and I'm going to have to unpack this with him. He's an undergraduate he has his undergraduate degree from Sarah Lawrence College in Bronxville, New York, and he holds a certificate in Russian language and literature from Leningrad State University. I've been there, Cliff. He is a member of the Washington Institute of Foreign Affairs. He's married and has 2 children. Welcome to Cliff May. You know, Cliff, I think you're like me. We both were studying Russian and the Soviet Union at a very different time. And here we are back 30 plus years after the fall of the Berlin Wall and the disappearance of the Soviet Union. And we're back talking about the same things. In fact, tell you what, let's start there. Because one of the things that I have a hard time grappling with, but let me start here. I've come to my free market, limited government, conservative values, libertarian values via ardent anti-communism. I started as an anti-communist, and it seems to me that our concerns about Russia have become muddied, but many of the things that were promised by Khrushchev in the early 1960s in terms of using the tools of Western democracy to undo classical liberalism in the West are coming to fruition. What are you seeing here? How are we so divided on these things now?
Well, a good question and a difficult question.
Yeah.
When I went to the Soviet Union initially, I was not terribly anti-communist. I was kind of in the mushy middle. I was very open to being persuaded of different things. I became anti-communist the longer I spent in the Soviet Union.
How long were you there?
Well, I went for the first time on a summer program between high school and college back in 1969. So that's a long time ago.
Sure.
I then went back in 72 as an exchange student. It was the only undergraduate exchange program that existed in those days. There were fewer than 20 of us between U.S. and Leningrad State University.
Sure.
Leningrad State University, rah, 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 go Reds, you know. It was from universities all over. And then I went back as a journalist for some time. But the longer I spent, and the better I spoke Russian, and the more I understood the Soviet Union, the more anti-communist I became. Sure. It just took a while. What's really disappointing is I remember thinking, okay, I don't know that the Soviet Empire is going to collapse. I don't know that the Soviet Union won't exist. Most people didn't think so. There were some predictions. There was a book by Andrea Malrich called "Will the Soviet Union Survive to 1984?"
Wow!
And everyone thought that was just fiction, but he wasn't that wrong. Well, what's amazing and astonishing and distressing, of course, is although the Soviet Union collapsed, it didn't become what I hoped it might become, a free country, a normal country, a place I'd go in the summertime and maybe take a dacha somewhere outside of Moscow.
Sure, of course.
Bring my wife, bring my kids to a cruise on the Volga River.
Commune amongst the birch trees and write your poetry. Yes, I understand.
I'll go further and offer this analysis. We like to think we won the Cold War. Mm-hmm. We didn't.
Okay.
And the reason we didn't is because the Soviet Union collapsed, the Berlin Wall fell, but the People's Republic of China continues the Cold War.
Yes.
Again, after a brief hiatus. Yeah. And it does so with Vladimir Putin's Russia as its junior partner.
Right.
And it does so with the Islamic Republic of Iran as a junior partner. And a growing list of other junior partners, including North Korea and Venezuela and Cuba, and a list of countries in Africa that no one knows about or could find on a map. But I spent time in Africa, so I do know this. So we are in the midst of something, if not a Cold War 2.0, a more either way, it is a more challenging and threatening environment than we ever had during the Cold War.
I would agree with you that it is at least as challenging as the hottest points in the Cold War. And I have been laying out the case, and I don't like laying out this case. I don't like being as concerned as I am about this. But as a student of history and of political science, I can't help but look at what's happening around the world. And given what you're talking about, right, the relationships between Russia and China and Iran and the various hot spots that are happening, I see the conditions as being very similar to the precursor to World War I, and that alarms me. And maybe I'm overstating the case. Tell me that I'm not, or at least talk me through where you think about what you think about this.
Yeah, I don't think you're overstating the case. Look, we all know that history it rhymes, it echoes, it doesn't quite repeat, and so you can. I think you can look at the precursors to World War I or World War II or the Cold War. In any case, what we should be seeing is an extraordinarily threatening environment out there to which I would argue we are not responding nearly adequately. And that is one of the lessons we should be taking, by the way, from the war that is ongoing right now at this moment in Gaza with Israel, because Israel clearly did not take seriously enough the threat posed by Hamas.
Right.
They were concentrating much more on Hezbollah, which is a more strategic threat, and of course the Islamic Republic of Iran, which could be nuclear armed very soon. We need to. One of the lessons we should be taking is that you must take your enemies and their intentions seriously, and you must look very hard at what capabilities they have and are developing in order to achieve the ambitions those intentions suggest. And I don't think we're doing that right now.
Let's step back. We will definitely come back to this. Let's talk about the work that you're doing at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. Formed, as we said in your bio, in the wake of the 9/11 attacks in 2001. The work is extensive, and I know your scholars are touching on all of these issues because I've been perusing your website. By the way, folks, it's fdd.org.
Yeah, that's all. Yeah.
FDD.org is where you go and find it. We'll repeat that at the end. But talk about how the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, how it was started and how it's grown.
Okay, well, interestingly, it started with a conversation I had with Gene Kirkpatrick and Jack Kemp. Now, you know who those people are.
Oh, yes, I do.
But a lot of you, I don't know all your listeners do, our young interns tend not to. But very quickly, Jean Kirkpatrick was the first woman to be U.S. ambassador to the United Nations under Ronald Reagan, a Democrat who came over to work for Ronald Reagan, and she was part of his security cabinet. Not all UN ambassadors are, as you know, but again, most people don't. Jack Kemp was a very important American politician, he was a House member. He was considered himself a compassionate conservative.
Yes.
He was HUD secretary. He ran for president in primaries, but got beaten by George W. Bush. HUD secretary, ran for vice president on the ticket with Bob Dole. He was a football player. Right.
Oh, yes.
Anyhow, I had a conversation with the two of them in September of 2001, before, not after, the 9/11 attacks. Okay. And essentially what they said to me was, Cliff, we think America is taking a holiday from history. Cliff, we think we are taking a peace dividend prematurely.
Yes.
People think that the Soviet Union collapsed. We have no more enemies. But consider, 1983, we get hit in Beirut. By whom? For what reason? 1993, we get hit in New York City. How come? 1996, Khobar Towers, Saudi Arabia. 1998, two of our embassies are blown up in Africa. 2000, the U.S. is cold. Cliff, we could tell you a whole bunch more. Is anybody connecting the dots? Is anybody looking at all this in a comprehensive way from a national security perspective? Cliff, what we want you to do for us is just tell us who's doing this. Just do some research. Look around.
Yeah.
Think tanks, universities, who, what? I said, wow, what an interesting assignment. I was working as a fancy consultant of some kind at that time. So I started to do this research. And again, within about a week, 9/11 happens. I meet with them again. I say, this is what you feared. This is what you anticipated, isn't it? They said, precisely it is. What are you finding? I'm saying nobody wants to deal with this. Why? They say. I say, I'm not exactly sure, but I think that a big part of the reason is behind this terrorism, behind these attacks on the U.S., there are motivations that are not just ideological, but theological, that religion is involved, and no one wants to deal with anybody's religion. No one wants to say, oh, there's something terrible going on within the Islamic world. So, then they said, if we wanted to create some kind of organization to look at these problems, study them comprehensively, not shy away from anything, educate Congress, the administration, whatever administration it is, the public as best we can, come up with an option. Give us a memo on what it would look like. Okay, I'll do my best. I come up with an idea for an organization. It's a think tank. I have a name, a mission statement, a business plan. I give it to them. They read it. They say, yeah, this is kind of what we had in mind. We like this. We think this needs to be done. I said, great. If I can be of any further service to you, you let me know. They said, no, sit back down in that chair.
Yes.
We're not going to spend 6 months after what's just happened looking for the perfect person. You got a blueprint here. You're obsessed with this too, are you not? And I was I would say for two reasons.
Yeah.
One, two people I knew died on 9/11. That was most proximate, most immediate.
Yeah.
But two, I had been a reporter in Iran in 1979 covering the revolution.
Wow.
And I kind of knew all this comes out of that. We can explore why, but all of this comes out of that. That was the seeds. Those were the seeds that were planted. We can discuss that if you want.
Yeah.
Anyhow, and I said, so I am interested. I said, but I know nothing about I'm not entrepreneurial. I've never built an organization. They said, don't worry about it. You do it. Quit your job. Get it set up. By January 2nd, 2002, we had a small office and we began to build. I'll tell you one other thing I think is important, and that is that our task was simpler then than it is now. Why do I say that? Because in 2002, we were worried about Islamism, a new word, jihadism, a new word for a lot of us. We were worried about terrorism, all of that. But we all thought that China, it's now our friend.
Right.
It's 2001, it had been brought into the WTO by President Clinton because they were now going to be good stakeholders in the international liberal rules-based order. That we're not worried about China. And Russia, it was on the road to being a democratic country. I had been over there post-revolution, met with journalists, very excited, freedom of the press, all of that. So we only had one thing to worry about. And now we have multiple things to worry about, as you and I just discussed.
And it's easier for them to all get connected online, and the ways that they can play games we will definitely come back to that. But let's ping on that point that you raised, Cliff, which is all of the seeds of this are in the Islamist revolution in Iran of 1979. Flesh that out for me.
Okay, so what do you have in 1979? You have the first modern nation state committed to jihad against the West. That's what that revolution was about. Okay. A lot of people didn't see it. Again, I was there as a young reporter. My colleagues, most didn't see it. I didn't really understand it, but I was skeptical of what was going on. Now, keep in mind, this nation state was Shia and largely Persian.
Yes.
But it still galvanized the Sunni and Arab worlds.
Interesting.
Why? Because in the Sunni and Arab worlds were humiliated by the fact that the first modern nation state committed to jihad against the West is not Arab and is not Sunni. And so a lot of people in the Sunni Arab world, not all, a lot of said, where is our nation state committed to jihad? It's supposed to be Saudi Arabia, but guess what? The Saudis are having too good a time shopping in Harrods, skiing in Gstaad, and drinking whiskey with their infidel buddies back in Washington.
Sure.
So from that seed, Al-Qaeda grew.
Yes.
Okay. And another thing that happened is after the revolution in Iran, and after what is known as the Siege of Mecca. And there's a book called The Siege of Mecca by a Wall Street Journal reporter, very good reporter called Yaroslav Trifomov, which everyone should read. The Siege of Mecca was ultra Wahhabis taking over Mecca and trying to bring down the Saudi royal family and take over Arabia, right?
Yes.
And a lot of bloodshed. Eventually, the Saudis brought in the French special forces to get them out, to defeat them. They couldn't do it on their own. But the Saudis, and Saudis will tell you this now, they took exactly the wrong lesson from that. They said, oh, we have to show that we are committed to jihad too.
Sure.
So what we're going to do is we're going to spend on madrasas in Pakistan that train terrorists, and we're going to spend billions of dollars. And as one Saudi put it to me, what we did, he said, was we created a Frankenstein monster.
Yes.
It then attacked you, but it's also attacked us. And I do believe sincerely that the current crown prince, whatever you say about him, understands this is not the way to go.
Sure.
Not for what he wants to do. So what happened? But what happened is you did create out of the revolution in Iran, which was an Islamic revolution, not an Iranian revolution, an Islamic revolution. You ended up with Al-Qaeda, and that meant the Islamic State, and that meant all the other groups that have come out from that.
And then at the same time, because the timing can't be ignored, as the United States is focused on what's happening in Iran, a wake-up call because folks weren't watching. At the same time, the CIA misses the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan right next door. And all of a sudden, then we're put in this position of having to start arming Islamic fundamentalists there in order to fight their jihad against the Soviets. And we didn't keep our eyes on that ball, once we were able to defeat they were able to defeat the Soviets and the Soviets marched out in 1989. All of these things are tied together, aren't they?
Yes, they absolutely are. And two more points on that. One is, yes, we supported these jihadis fighting the Soviets. One, we didn't really understand their ideology or theology.
That's my point. Yes.
We didn't understand. But you can also say, if you want to be generous, it was an experiment. We're going to support them in their liberation movement against the Soviet Union. Maybe they'll say as a result, the Americans ain't so bad. They don't want to rule us. They didn't want the Soviets to rule us. They're actually our friends. If you understood deeper their philosophy, their ideology, their theology, you'd know why they will have to turn on us eventually.
And this is I guess gets into an important point, because I want to talk about how FDD, the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, how you all define democracy versus how others in the international affairs community might define democracy. Because I would submit that, over I would say the last 80 years, and maybe for the first 60 out of the last 80 years, the United States spent a lot of time and effort fomenting the rise of democracies in a lot of nations, but ignored the freedom and individual rights component and allowed these entities to descend into mobocracies. Talk about how you guys define it and sort of the differences therein.
Okay, well, first thing is this. Keep in mind, and people sometimes get this wrong, it's the FDD is the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, not democracy. And what do I mean by that? I meant free societies, the free world, democratic societies under siege by anti-freedom, anti-democratic elements. That's what we're trying to defend, right?
Yes.
So we're not promoting democracy necessarily. Yes. Although I did, and I can tell you about this. I served on Condi Rice's committee for the promotion of democracy under the Bush administration. But I had some arguments with Condi Rice, for whom I have great respect.
Yes.
And I agree with what's implicit in what you just said, is that I do think we should, and the United States should be pushing for basic freedoms.
Yeah.
But to setting up a democratic society is a much more complicated endeavor. This gets to one of the arguments that I had with Condi Rice, which is to say that elections alone do. My argument was elections alone do not a democracy make.
Absolutely.
So when she pushed for elections, say in Gaza, and I said, look, if you cannot have a newspaper with an op-ed, if you cannot have somebody stand on a soapbox and say, vote for me and I'll bring you peace and prosperity by making peace with the Israelis, and he won't live to see the sunrise the next day, then you can't have an election.
Absolutely.
And her view was, well, you got to start somewhere, don't you? And I said, yes, you do. And you start with basic freedoms. You don't start with elections that have no political parties or only one political party, and every one of whose members is well armed. That's not going to work out so well, it seems to me. I think I was right. I think she was wrong on that, but I understand. So I'm all for democratic societies surviving and figuring out, and it's not easy, how they survive. We're having trouble in the U.S. Israel was having trouble before this war among itself over the question of judicial reform, was turning neighbor against neighbor, brother against brother. Yeah. It's just amazing. But look, what the major asset of a democratic society is not that it eliminates conflict. Quite the contrary.
Right.
All a democratic society can hope to do is channel conflict into nonviolent expressions.
I love that. In fact, I may have to quote that later on today. I think it's yours. It's a beautiful, beautiful sentiment. I mean, it's interesting because I was in the 2000s while we were still, in Iraq, but in the wake of the early days of the conflict in Iraq, I was part of a group that was trying to find ways to implement a system of private property rights in Iraq as the cornerstone. The two books that sort of changed my life, Property and Freedom by Daniel Pipes and The Mystery of Capital by Hernando de Soto. And one of the things that I'm going to throw a curveball at you as we talk about these issues and the promotion of these systems abroad, how important is it to inculcate local customs and traditions? For instance, when MacArthur was trying to reform post-World War II Japan, he looked at the local institutions and he says, okay, we're not going to throw out the baby with the bathwater here. We got to find a way to get investment by the Japanese people. We were looking at it. There used to be, I don't know if they're still in existence, a think tank called the Minaret of Freedom Institute, which was an Islamic free market limited government think tank, at which point I learned, for instance, that there is no such thing as a mortgage in Islamist societies because, borrowing against your home and charging interest is all. So how do you build and grow equity? So, but talk about this, talk about sort of imbuing, because you've spent time in Africa, as you said, you've spent time in the Middle East. How do we imbue the sort of local traditions and customs and systems into these new systems of freedom?
Well, I would say that we can only be so helpful.
Yeah,
and
sure.
What I mean by that, and my views have changed on this over the years, but based on experience, I don't think we can export democracy. I don't think we can implant democracy in foreign soils. I do think the best we can do is we can identify those fighting for freedom and democracy in other places and give them our support. But they have to do it themselves. We cannot do it for them. I don't think, the National Endowment for Democracy, lovely, smart, scholarly people there, they haven't figured out a system to get democracy working in these countries. We can't do it for people. They have to figure it out on their own. We can be helpful. That's as far as we can go.
It's the difference between political science and international relations in theory and international relations and political science in practice. You have to have some practice. Well, and let's talk about that with regards to these. Actually, before we get to what's happening in the conflicts, one of the things that I'm bothered by, and you and I have tread a lot of the same ground. We were talking about it before you came on the air. One of the things that concerns me among folks who should know better regarding the various threats to institutions of freedom, such as the Russians and such as Hamas and the government in Gaza, they seem to not understand the role that the United States needs to play. It gets into what you just said about supporting them. And I'm specifically focused on my friends and brethren on the Republican side of things who seem to have lost the thread in, places like Ukraine and the Ukraine-Russia conflict. How did we lose this thread? What's gone wrong?
Ooh, I'm a little puzzled by it. Partly it's no. I mean, partly it's not seeing the macro.
Right.
So I mean, it's interesting to me and odd that you can have, and you do have, Republicans who absolutely are very supportive of Israel in its fight against Hamas,
Yes.
which is this genocidal terrorist organization, and God bless them for that. But they don't see that Putin taking over Ukraine would also be detrimental to the West. They do see probably that Xi Jinping taking over Taiwan would be detrimental to the West. But they don't see how all this is wrapped up in one kind of whole.
Neat little bow.
Right?
Yeah.
So that they can say, like, Tucker Carlson, for example, Ukraine, let Putin have it. We don't like it. We don't really care about it. And one thing, I think I have some understanding of who Putin is after all these years.
Yes.
And what he's trying to do is not crazy, by the way. What he wants to do is restore the Russian Empire.
Right.
I think he thinks that's his obligation in life is to restore and he can't do that unless he subjugates the Ukrainians and turns them into 40 million new Russians. Now, I don't think he's done at the end of that. If he achieves that, I think he has much more that he will believe he has to do. I don't think he just kind of retires to his dacha with his girlfriend. But I do think that's part of it. And the problem is that the Ukrainians want self-determination. They do not see themselves as Russians. We used to in America, in self-determination of nations. We used to believe, we fought a war in Kuwait because Kuwait's such a wonderful society. No, because under the international order we've been trying to establish after World War II, you don't get to wipe nations off the map.
Well, especially when we've promised a nation that we made them give up their nuclear weapons.
Yes.
In just this contingency. This is the thing that gets me here.
We guarantee their integrity.
And it gets to I don't, like you, I'm sure, I don't believe we can dictate to Ukraine whether or not they want to join NATO. Now, obviously other NATO nations have to figure that out as well. You and I also know, I would think that there's no way that Ukraine can join NATO so long as their sovereign territory is still in dispute. But the reality is, I don't think that we have the right or the power, or should we? We should never set the precedent that we're going to dictate to somebody, you can't join our club as an agreement for ending this war. That's not something that we ought to do. But folks seem to misunderstand this. But it gets at one last thing on this score. With regards to Putin, I know you will understand this. Once a Chekist, always a Chekist. The man came into power through the KGB. He is using that intelligence apparatus to turn the United States inside out. I'm sorry. Talk about that. Talk about how China and Russia and other nations are using the things that are important and vital to our Western classical liberal society, using them against us as a way of turning us against each other.
Well, the most obvious example is the United Nations.
Yeah.
We set up the United Nations after World War II with the idea that we would establish, and I know people's eyes that go, I don't know, it's a big phrase, the idea of an international order. It's very hard for people to understand what that is because it just kind of exists, but it doesn't. We tried to set something up with international law and human rights. We had a universal Declaration of Human Rights. The idea is, can't we all be on the same page with some basic stuff? And I have some quarrels with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights.
No property rights, for instance, but go ahead.
Yeah, right. And a lot of socialist rights, which, anyhow, we can go to. But anyhow, what we're trying to say, hey, if we all obey certain ground rules, won't it be better for everybody? And can't we do it this way? China wants to dominate the world.
Right.
This is not some Americans think, why would they want that? Hey, this is what... it's not.
Why would they?
Why wouldn't they? This is what I mean. From Genghis Khan to Alexander the Great to Napoleon, this has always been the ideal, the idea, the ambition of people who thought they were great. We're the first ones to say we don't want to dominate the world. We want to be, influential, maybe a little bit more than others, but we're not. we're not going to take any property. We're not going to take any territory. We're not going to tell the Saudis, your oil is our oil. We're not going to tell that to the Qataris or the Emiratis. Right. We're going to buy it from you at a fair price. You can have an open. The world has never been run by, if we're an imperialist power, the world has never seen one like the U.S.
Sure.
Even so, China and Russia and Iran and others say, no, we don't want America in control. We want America either destroyed or diminished. Xi Jinping wants to run Asia and then the world. That is his ambition. As I say, Vladimir Putin wants to reestablish the Russian Empire. That's what he can do in his lifetime. Maybe after that, there'll be more. Will there be conflicts between Russia and China in the future? If all this, I think so.
Yeah, absolutely. They share a border.
They share a border, and a lot of what we call Russia is not Russia at all. Right. It's conquered territories in the Far East. Russia has not much population. China has a lot of population. They're going to push it, but that's years and that's a few decades ahead. And the Islamic Republic of Iran wants to be the superpower of the Muslim world. It wants to, more than that, it wants to reestablish the caliphate. Except, to be really precise, if you're a Shia, it's an imamate, not a caliphate. I'll just throw that. Yes. But it's not that, it's no real. So all of them say, well, what's stopping us from achieving our ambitions? And the answer is 3 words, the 4 words, the United States of America, right? That's what's stopping us. So we have to either destroy or diminish them. That's why the Islamic Republic of Iran, they chant death to America every Friday night and have for 44 years since I was there. And we see that Xi Jinping doesn't want to be our partner, even though it would be beneficial economically. It's about more than economics. And again, Vladimir Putin wants to do what he thinks a czar must do.
Yeah, it is amazing to me, the various theories about this, the Third Rome theory, the imperial theory. The bottom line in the end, of course, is he what he certainly wants in the near term is he wants Ukraine, certainly the eastern provinces of Ukraine, and it is incumbent upon us to ensure that not only that he doesn't get them, but he isn't rewarded by holding on to them. That's an issue.
That's very important. That's right. Because he will go from Moldova as low-hanging fruit after that. And I think he would also, if try to build up strength and then say, maybe it's time for me to take on NATO more directly.
Yeah. Wow.
And I would do that through, if I were he, I would do that by establishing a land bridge through probably southern Lithuania to get to the one province that he has, which he took from the Germans. Yeah. Königsberg was the German name, right?
And now it's sorry, go
Kaliningrad.
Ahead. Kaliningrad. Sorry, of course I should know this.
On the Baltic, which is where his Baltic fleet is.
Having visited Kalinin in 1989 before it, not Kaliningrad, but Kalinin outside of Moscow, before it went back to being called Tver after the fall of the Soviet Union. Yeah. This was, anyway, let me take a step back here, because this is the fascinating part. I am very familiar with Sarah Lawrence College. I grew up in Westchester, New York.
Oh, did you?
I did. I had friends in high school. I went to a very progressive high school in the Bronx. A number of folks I knew went on to Sarah Lawrence. Listen, I went to William & Mary for undergraduate, so I'm not out of step with a lot of my fellow William & Mary alumni. How do you get treated by Fieldston, where I went to high school? I'm looked at as a unique outcropping and someone to be studied under the microscope. You can draw your conclusions there. But how does I mean, I guess you said it. You were not what's the word we're looking for? You were not anti-communist. You weren't pro-communist. You were mushy, as you said. I was going to say atheistic. That's not the word I'm looking for. Anyway, agnostic. You were agnostic on communism. But how does that play out with the Sarah Lawrence of today, where there, all kinds of demands? Anyway, not that you need to cast aspersions on your alma mater, but it's a fascinating part of your life story.
Well, listen, it was a great fun place to go.
Yeah.
I was in the first crop of freshman males.
Oh, yes, of course.
That was, pretty, it was 3 girls for every boy. That was awful.
Surf City, here we come. Sure.
Surf City, here right. And, basically what happened is I was living in Manhattan with my parents. I'd gone to school in Manhattan. I wanted to go to college. close by New York.
There you go.
My parents wanted me to, but I was also working a little bit in off Broadway theater and
excellent.
things like that. So Sarah Lawrence, and I had a friend from high school who was there and who said basically, Clifford, this is the place for you. Trust me, you're gonna love this place.
Where did you go to high school?
I went to the High School of Performing Arts.
Oh,
the
very
Fame
nice.
School.
The Fame School. But when it was still in the Fame building, the Fame School building.
It was still in the Fame School building on 46th Street, at 46th and Broadway. And so that's how I ended up at Sarah Lawrence. And
that makes sense. A big school for performing arts there, or SUNY Purchase, or wherever. That's fab. We're big into theater. My family is. So we're up. We were just up in New York to see Merrily We Roll Along, and we're very excited about it. Anyway, not that I wanted there. So Phil. So Cliff, let me ask you. We're winding us down. I want to be cognizant of your time. It's something I almost did, and I say this on every show, but I want to explain it to my guests. I almost did a podcast that I was going to call Outside Interests, because folks who do policy, they tend to be viewed within that policy lens, but I like people to know that these are real people. Like you were doing off-Broadway theater in high school, and then you went to Sarah Lawrence. When you are not doing your policy work, if you're doing stuff outside of your policy, what are you doing? What are some of your outside interests?
Fewer than I used to have when I was younger and perhaps more fit and had more time, frankly, because I have very little. But I do. So I took up golf a few years ago.
Very nice.
And I find being outside and concentrating on hitting a little white ball into the woods clears my mind. Yeah. I used to do a lot of sports. I used to kayak. I was a huge skier from the time I was a tiny kid. My parents met skiing. I used to live in Colorado. But here living in Washington D.C., So mostly golf is golf, and I'm somewhat of a movie buff still, I would say.
There you go. What have you watched recently? Anything come to mind? I know that's usually a tough question.
It's a tough question. Hard to remember.
Let me just tell you, I just rewatched
for
the first time in forever the trial of Billy Jack, and let me tell you, it does not hold up.
It does not hold up.
It does not hold up. And I very much wanted to watch it. I mean, Bill, I don't even think Billy Jack holds up so much, Tom Laughlin. But anyway, I'm sorry.
So I would, just in terms of real, I have to say, I thought Breaking Bad was brilliant.
Very nice.
Drama and brilliant acting. And I liked after that is the sort of follow-on sequel, Better Call Saul.
Sure, Better Call Saul.
I thought the dialogue, the acting was just fantastic. I liked a lot of these series. I tend to watch them while I'm on the treadmill, and because I don't sit a lot. Occasionally I will. I'll sit with my wife, will watch The Crown or something like that, which I thought has been pretty good. But Tehran, if you've seen that one on Apple TV, is that good and up to date and really ripped from the headlines.
We just finished watching Daisy Jones and the Six on Amazon. And I don't know if you've seen this, but it's like a fictional 1970s rock band. It's like modeled after Fleetwood Mac and a little bit of the Allman Brothers and a bunch of different things, and sort of about the rise and fall of this band. And it's really good.
I'll give you another one you'll like. Please. It's called Totems.
Okay, sure.
And you've heard of it, yeah.
I've heard of it, yeah.
It's spies. It's the Soviets. It's the French, and it's in English and French and Russian. So if you have if you remember some of your Russian, it's kind of fun. There's a Russian girl who the French scientist falls in love with.
Nice.
But it's really very good.
Excellent. Well, listen, Cliff, I appreciate you joining us. Clifford May, founder and president of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, plural. FDD.org is the website. Thank you so very much for joining us today.
My great pleasure, Andrew.
And this has been yet another episode of the Lunch Hour with Federal Newswire. As I've said, please go and check us out. If you're watching us, listen to us wherever fine podcasts are. You can subscribe, leave a comment, let your friends and family members know. Have a great week, everybody, and please enjoy the rest of your lunch.
This has been the Federal Newswire Lunch Hour Podcast, hosted by Andrew Langer. Check out the Federal Newswire's family of websites, as well as their social media stream.